All right, welcome to Critical Wave Theory, and we're getting into music again, and rock music at that. So, in this episode, I'm taking a look at Facelift, the groundbreaking debut album from Alice in Chains, a record that arrived before grunge became a cultural phenomenon and helped set the stage for the explosion of Seattle rock that would soon change popular music. Released by Columbia Records on August 21st, 1990, Facelift was the first full length studio album from Alice in Chains, and while later releases from Seattle bands would dominate headlines and reshape rock radio, Facelift occupies a unique space in history as one of the earliest major label albums associated with the emerging grunge scene. And at the time, few people outside the Pacific North, I almost said specific Northwest, the Pacific Northwest were talking about grunge. The term itself had not yet become a marketing buzzword, and landmark releases such as Nirvana's Nevermind and Soundgarden's Bad Motor Finger were still in the future. Yet Alice in Chains was already forging a sound that combined the weight of heavy metal with the emotional honesty and rawness that would become hallmarks of the Seattle scene. The band's lineup featured vocalist Lane Staley, guitarist and songwriter Jerry Cantrell, bassist Mike Starr, and drummer Sean Kinney. Formed in Seattle in 1987, the group quickly distinguished itself from both traditional metal bands and the alternative rock acts that surrounded them. Their music was a little bit darker, more introspective, and often unsettling, yet it remained highly melodic. And that really kind of is the Alice in Chains sound. They usually are quite melodic, and a major part of the band's appeal came from the chemistry between Staley and Cantrell. Staley's powerful and haunting vocal delivery paired perfectly with Cantrell's brooding guitar work and memorable riffs, as well as his own voice. And together they created a sound that felt both heavy and emotionally vulnerable. The album opens with We Die Young, a brief but powerful track that served as the band's debut single. Built around a crushing guitar riff, the song immediately introduced listeners to Alice in Chains' more aggressive style. Of course, they do have a softer side, but this is really one of their more overtly metal sounding songs. Despite its short running time, it became a favorite among rock audiences and helped attract attention to the band before the album's release. Now, it's not my favorite song by them or anything like that, and it's not the best song on the album, but it does what it's supposed to do. I'll just put it like that. And the song most people associate with Facelift is undoubtedly Man in the Box, their big hit from this album. It remains one of Alice in Chains' signature recordings and one of the defining rock songs of the early 1990s, and maybe you could say of all time. You know, people, if you create a list of classic rock songs, you could imagine Man in the Box being featured on that list. Like, especially if it's a list of like the 50 or the 100, or especially like the 500 greatest rock songs or something like that. One could easily imagine Man in the Box making the cut. Although, quite annoyingly, I'm getting a little sidetracked here perhaps, but one of Rolling Stone's lists of greatest vocalists, I think it includes like 500 different people, but it didn't include Lane Staley. Somehow it missed him, even though, of course, Lane Staley is considered a legendary rock vocalist. He's often, making such lists for a lot of other people, but when it comes to Rolling Stone, well, I guess they look the other way on that one. Anyway, maybe I'm getting sidetracked on that, but I just wanted to put that out there. And its lyrics explore themes of, the themes of Man in the Box. The lyrics include themes of censorship, control, and social conformity, while the music features one of the most recognizable guitar parts of the era. And it's a very simple riff. You can even watch and learn how to play it pretty easily on YouTube. Jerry Cantrell has a video where he straight up shows you how to play the riff, and it's really just two notes for the most part, and then there's like a little flashy part that he adds in here and there. A key ingredient in that sound is the talk box effect that is sometimes used by Jerry Cantrell. For listeners unfamiliar with the device, a talk box, it routes a guitar signal through a tube into the performer's mouth, allowing the player to shape the guitar's sound with vocal movements before it reaches a microphone. The result is the distinctive vocal like guitar tone heard throughout the song. And of course, if you are a guitarist and you don't have a talk box, you can kind of approximate the effect just by using a deep wah sound. But of course, it's not going to sound completely like the talk box. So there's a little bit of a side guitar lesson for you if you're at all interested. Although many discussions of famous talkbox recordings focus on songs by artists like Peter Frampton or Joe Walsh, some fans argue that Man in the Box deserves far more recognition whenever the greatest talkbox performances are discussed, and or at least equal recognition. Maybe it's a little bit much to say more recognition. I don't know. But it is one of their signature songs, and that talkbox sound obviously really helped put them on the map about as much as it did for Peter Frampton. So MTV embraced the song's striking video, and rock radio stations quickly followed, and the exposure transformed Alice in Chains from a promising regional act into a nationally recognized band. As the song gained popularity, album sales began to climb steadily, and I remember some interview with somebody in a hair metal band at the time. He was kind of making fun of how Alice in Chains opened for their band, and they looked like they hadn't showered in a week. He said, or something like that. He's like, "Who are these dorks?" And it turns out they were one of the biggest bands of the 1990s, and they were gonna basically knock hair metal out of the upper echelon of the rock world. Um, so sorry about that, but grunge just had to come along and wreck the status quo, I guess. And other standout tracks reveal different sides of the band's songwriting. Sea of Sorrow, really a great song, probably my favorite one from the album. It demonstrated their ability to balance heavy riffs with memorable melodies, creating a song that was both accessible and emotionally resonant. Meanwhile, Bleed the Freak and Love Hate Love showcase the darker side of Alice in Chains, especially Love Hate Love, which just it has some kind of demented sounding lyrics about like peeling the skin off of a face and stuff like that. I mean, it's just sort of on the nose dark in terms of the vibe of that song, but it is a great song, very well structured, and it proves to me that like you can have a little bit of like flashiness and still write for the song. That song has just a little bit of flash to it. Love, hate, love, and of course you could say that Wayne Staley is showing off a little bit with his vocal skills, but again, it matches the feel of the song, so it doesn't come off like him just showing off for the sake of showing off. And those songs, they connect with fans because of their honesty and the emotional intensity, and that's really one of the things that makes Alice in Chains seem genuine. It's one of the reasons they have such strong fans over the years. It just sounds real, rather than relying on fantasy or escapism. They confronted difficult feelings in a direct and authentic manner. Granted, maybe they could have had a few more jokester sort of songs thrown into the mix. I don't know. Maybe they were a little bit too bleak for some listeners. I could see that critique of the band. But actually, like this album, I have to say it, this is actually like at times the lighter side of Alice in Chains. Like there are actually some different elements of the band that are on this album that aren't as noticeable on the other albums. Like there's a little bit more of a funk aspect to it. I'm not going to even say which track that is, but if you listen to it, you know what I mean. It's a little bit unexpected, but this was sort of a transitional period, I guess you could say. Alice in Chains really did have some of those crossover vibes more on this album. Like they had some more of those metal vibes, I guess you could say, than some of their other albums. Like all of their albums have these heavy aspects, but they were a little bit more metal in the crossover sense on this album too. Or in the, did I say on the crossover sense? In the crossover sense. Like they have just different emotions. Like some of the songs are a little bit lighter than you might expect from Alice in Chains, but this still does have songs like "Love Hate Love," which is in some ways probably one of their darkest songs. Um, and commercially, Facelift was not an immediate blockbuster. The album took some time to find its audience. However, the success of Man in the Box gradually pushed it up the charts, eventually reaching number 42 on the Billboard 200. And the Recording Industry Association of America, those lovable little scamps, they certified the album gold in 1991, and by 1997 it achieved double platinum status. So there. Anyway, the critical reactions at the time were apparently divided. Some reviewers saw Alice in Chains primarily as a heavy metal band rather than part of the growing Seattle scene. Nevertheless, many praised the album's dark atmosphere, strong musicianship, and memorable songwriting, and as the years passed, its reputation only continued to grow. Now it's seen as a very important album and sort of defining what grunge meant in the 1990s, and reminds you that grunge or these bands associated with that label, they had some diverse influences and some diverse sounds. It's one of the reasons bands like these were actually popular. They didn't just have one sound that they did, even though you could kind of stereotype them. But even bands like Nirvana wasn't actually just one note. They actually had different vibes that you could get from their albums too. And of course, that's the same thing with Alice in Chains. Although it must be admitted that Alice in Chains is a little bit more, I guess, depressing sometimes than some of these other bands. At least more noticeably so. And today, Facelift is widely regarded as a pivotal release in the evolution of 1990s rock. It arrived before grunge became a mainstream phenomenon, yet contained many of the elements that would soon captivate audiences and, again, help sink hair metal and stuff like that. Some people would say it helped sink not just hair metal, but maybe metal, maybe rock music in general when it comes to the pessimistic critics who disparaged grunge overall and saw it as being too serious or too this or too that. Its combination of metallic power, emotional depth, and unforgettable songs really made Alice in Chains one of the most distinctive bands of their generation. It's one of the reasons people still put their logos on their t-shirts and stuff. So the group would go on to release acclaimed albums like Dirt and years later Black Gives Way to Blue. So a lot of people don't seem to know this, but Alice in Chains actually still exists as a band, and they don't sound bad. Go ahead and check out their newer stuff as well. And of course, you can always go back to this other stuff from their past. Obviously, it was Facelift that introduced the world to their unique voice and demonstrated that heavy music could be both crushingly powerful and deeply human. And, well, I suppose Black Sabbath did that at times too, but this was like a fresh reminder in a slightly different way. So, more than 3 decades after its release, the album is an essential listen, not because it became mainstream, but because it's it's an album that captured a band discovering its identity and helped lay the groundwork for one of rock's most influential musical subgenres. And this album, it doesn't really fit that neatly into a genre label. However, if you're like me, you don't necessarily want to obsess that much about genres. But nevertheless, people people will always say Alice in Chains is a grunge band. This band isn't a grunge band. I've heard that Stone Temple Pilots aren't grunge, even though they have a very similar style. So, I try not to take this stuff too seriously. I just want to listen to the music because that's what matters at the end of the day. So, anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you at some other point. Well, I won't see you because I'm not omniscient. I probably will never actually meet you in real life or speak to you or anything like that. But let's pretend that I'll see you in the future or whatever. Anyway, feel free to like and subscribe, and share the episode. Listen to my other episodes where I talk about not only music, but sometimes movies, TV shows, philosophy, politics, space aliens, fairy tales, any number of things. Bigfoot, who knows? I could talk about anything on here. Anyway, have a good day.